Some people drive to court. Others take the bus. But Daniel Murray? He walked 5 miles with just 92 cents to his name. And what happened next restored faith in justice itself. This is the story of a man who had nothing left to give, except his word, and how one judge's decision changed everything. The Providence Municipal Court sees hundreds of cases every day. Traffic violations, parking tickets, the endless cycle of urban life. Most people walk in, pay their fine, and walk out. But on this particular morning, something different was about to happen. Something that would remind everyone watching that behind every case number, every violation, there's a human story waiting to be heard. Judge Frank Caprio had no idea that the next case would become one of his most powerful moments on the bench. Daniel Murray was 32 years old, and life had not been kind to him lately. Just 6 months earlier, he'd lost his job at a local warehouse when the company downsized. His savings, what little he had, evaporated faster than morning fog. His car, a 2005 Honda Civic that had served him faithfully for years, finally gave up. The repair estimate? $800, money he simply didn't have. Without a car, Daniel faced a harsh reality that millions of Americans know all too well. In a society built for automobiles, being carless isn't just inconvenient. It's isolating, it's limiting, and sometimes it's financially devastating. Those parking tickets that seemed manageable when he had steady income, they were now towering obstacles, each one representing a choice between paying rent or paying fines. 7 violations. That's what the court notice said when it arrived at Daniel's small studio apartment. 5 parking tickets from the months before his car broke down, when he desperately circled downtown Providence looking for affordable parking. 2 additional infractions that had snowballed from unpaid tickets. $250. That was the total. For many people, it's a manageable inconvenience. For Daniel, living paycheck to paycheck and now without any paycheck at all, it might as well have been $2,000. He stared at that court notice for 3 days, knowing he had 2 choices: appear in court and face Judge Caprio, or ignore it and watch his problems multiply exponentially. Daniel Murray was many things, but a man who ran from his responsibilities wasn't one of them. The night before his court date, Daniel sat on his narrow bed and counted the money in his wallet, twice. Then a third time, hoping somehow the numbers would change. 92 cents. 92 cents was all that stood between him and complete financial emptiness. Not enough for bus fare. Definitely not enough to pay his fines. Barely enough to buy a candy bar. Most people would have called the court, asked for a postponement, maybe tried to borrow money. But Daniel had already borrowed from everyone he could. His family lived 3 states away, struggling with their own challenges. His few friends had already helped him with rent and groceries. He looked at the court address on the notice, 25 Dorrance Street, Providence. He calculated the distance from his apartment in East Providence, about 5 miles, on foot, in whatever weather tomorrow would bring. But Daniel Murray had made a promise to himself a long time ago. He would face his problems head-on, especially when, he had no money to solve them. The alarm clock's harsh buzz cut through the darkness at 6:30 a.m. Daniel hadn't slept well. How could he? But he rose anyway, pulling on his most presentable clothes, khaki pants with a small tear near the pocket, a button-down shirt that had seen better days, and the sneakers that would carry him through the streets of Providence. He grabbed his wallet containing exactly 92 cents, the court notice, and his keys to an apartment he wasn't sure he could keep much longer. The October air was crisp, almost cold. Perfect walking weather, he told himself, trying to find something positive in his situation. The sun hadn't yet risen as Daniel Murray began the most important 5-mile walk of his life. Step by step, block by block, he made his way toward downtown Providence. Past houses where families were just beginning their morning routines, past coffee shops filling with the aroma of fresh brew he couldn't afford, past bus stops where other people waited for rides he couldn't take. Each step was a small act of determination. Each block conquered was proof that sometimes, when you have nothing left to give, you give anyway. About halfway through his journey, Daniel's feet began to ache. His sneakers, worn from months of being his only transportation, provided little cushion against the concrete sidewalks. But with each step, something interesting happened. Instead of feeling sorry for himself, Daniel began to notice things he'd never seen before. The way morning light painted the buildings, the kindness of a stranger who nodded good morning, the simple fact that he was healthy enough to make this walk. He thought about his grandfather, who'd immigrated to America with nothing but hope and the willingness to work. Sometimes, his grandfather used to say, the longest journey teaches you the most about yourself. Daniel was about to discover just how true those words were. By the time he reached the outskirts of downtown Providence, sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cool air. His legs felt heavy, but his resolve felt lighter. He was doing something difficult, but he was doing it. That had to count for something. The courthouse came into view at 8:45 a.m. Daniel had been walking for over an hour and 15 minutes. The Providence Municipal Court building stands as a monument to civic responsibility, its stone facade speaking of justice and order. For Daniel, walking up those steps felt like approaching both judgment and hope. Inside, the familiar sounds of a busy courthouse filled the air. Shuffling papers, muffled conversations, the occasional call of "all rise." Daniel found a seat in the back, grateful to finally rest his feet. He looked around at the other people waiting. Some scrolled through their phones. Others chatted quietly with companions. A few, like him, sat in nervous silence. But none of them, Daniel realized, had walked 5 miles to be here. None of them were sitting with exactly 92 cents in their pocket, wondering if honesty and humility could somehow bridge the gap between what he owed and what he could pay. When the bailiff called Daniel Murray, he stood on shaking legs and walked toward the bench where Judge Frank Caprio waited. Judge Caprio looked up from the case file, his experienced eyes immediately taking in details that others might miss. Here was a young man, well-groomed despite his obvious financial struggles, showing respect for the court and nervousness about his situation. "Mr. Murray," Judge Caprio said in his characteristically gentle tone, "I see you're here for 7 violations, 5 parking tickets and 2 additional infractions. The total fine is $250. Daniel stood straighter. "Yes, Your Honor." "Now, before we discuss payment," Judge Caprio continued, "I want to understand your situation. Are you working currently?" "No, Your Honor. I lost my job about 6 months ago. I've been looking, but..." Daniel's voice trailed off. He didn't want to make excuses. Judge Caprio leaned forward slightly, a gesture that somehow made the formal courtroom feel more intimate. "How did you get here today, Mr. Murray?" This was the question Daniel had been dreading and anticipating. He could lie, say he caught a ride. He could minimize the truth. Instead, he chose honesty. "I walked, Your Honor." "You walked? From where?" "From East Providence, Your Honor. About 5 miles. A hush fell over the courtroom. Judge Caprio studied Daniel's face, seeing the sincerity there, the quiet dignity of a man who might be down but wasn't defeated. "And what can you afford to pay today toward this fine?" Daniel reached into his pocket and withdrew his wallet. His hand shook slightly as he opened it and looked at the coins and single-dollar bill inside. "I have 92 cents, Your Honor." The courtroom was completely silent now. Even the court reporter paused in her typing. Judge Caprio sat back in his chair, processing what he'd just heard. Here was a young man who had walked over an hour through the streets of Providence with less than $1 to his name because he respected the law enough to show up. He could have ignored the court date, could have waited until his situation improved, could have found a dozen reasons to postpone this reckoning. Instead, He had literally put one foot in front of the other and walked toward his responsibility. "Mr. Murray," Judge Caprio said quietly, "you walked 5 miles to get here this morning?" "Yes, Your Honor. I know it's not an excuse for the violations, and I know I owe the money. I wanted to show up and ask if there might be some way to work out a payment plan, or maybe do community service or something. I don't want to be the kind of person who runs away from his obligations." Judge Caprio nodded slowly. In his decades on the bench, he'd seen every kind of excuse, every attempt at manipulation, every effort to avoid responsibility. What he was witnessing now was the opposite: a young man taking responsibility despite having no means to fulfill it. "Mr. Murray, I'm going to ask you to take a seat for just a moment while I consider your case." As Daniel returned to his seat, Judge Caprio took a moment to think. This wasn't just about parking violations anymore. This was about something much more fundamental. What does justice look like when applied to a person who has nothing material to give but everything moral to offer? The law was clear about the fines. The violations had occurred, and there were consequences. But the law also allowed for judicial discretion, for considering individual circumstances, for remembering that justice without mercy can become mere punishment. Judge Caprio thought about his own journey to the bench, his own family's struggles. When he was younger, the times when a little mercy had made all the difference. He thought about what kind of society punishes people for being poor, and what kind rewards people for doing the right thing even when it's difficult. But most of all, he thought about the young man who had just walked 5 miles to honor a court date with 92 cents in his pocket. That kind of character Judge Caprio knew was worth more than any fine. "Mr. Murray, please approach the bench again." Daniel stood and walked forward, his heart pounding. He'd done everything he could. He'd been honest, respectful, and responsible. Now he had to accept whatever consequences came next. "Mr. Murray, I've reviewed your case, and I want you to know that I'm impressed by your integrity. You could have avoided coming here today. You could have made excuses. Instead, you walked 5 miles because you believe in doing the right thing." Daniel nodded, unsure where this was leading. "Now, as it happens, I received a letter this morning from a gentleman named Frank Damasio. Mr. Damasio occasionally sends donations to help people who find themselves in exactly your situation. People who are trying to do the right thing but need a little help." Judge Caprio reached into his desk and pulled out an envelope. "Mr. Murray, I'm dismissing all of your fines. You don't owe the court anything. And furthermore, I want you to have this $25 for your trip home. I don't want you walking another 5 miles today." The courtroom erupted in spontaneous applause. Daniel stood frozen, unable to process what had just happened. "Your Honor, I don't know what to say," Daniel managed, his voice thick with emotion. "You don't need to say anything, son. Just keep being the kind of person who walks 5 miles to do the right thing. The world needs more people like you." Daniel accepted the $25 with shaking hands. It wasn't just money. It was validation that his struggles mattered, that his efforts to maintain his integrity despite his circumstances hadn't gone unnoticed. "Thank you, Your Honor. This means more than you know." "I think I have some idea," Judge Caprio replied with a gentle smile. "Good luck to you, Mr. Murray." As Daniel walked out of the courtroom, several people stopped him to shake his hand. A local news reporter asked for a brief interview. But what struck him most was the feeling that he hadn't just avoided a fine, he'd been reminded of his own worth. What happened in Providence Municipal Court that day was about more than one man's parking tickets. It was about the kind of justice system we want to live under, and the kind of society we want to build. Judge Frank Caprio could have simply applied the law mechanically. The violations occurred, therefore the fine must be paid. Case closed. Next, instead, he chose to see Daniel Murray not as a case number, but as a human being. Someone struggling, yes, but struggling with dignity. Someone poor in dollars, but rich in character. The $25 Judge Caprio gave Daniel wasn't charity. It was recognition. Recognition that sometimes the most important currency in life isn't money, but integrity. And that a justice system without compassion isn't really just at all. Daniel's 5-mile walk had started as a journey to face consequences. It ended as a testament to the power of doing the right thing, even when, especially when, it's difficult. The video of Daniel's court appearance spread across social media like wildfire. Within days, millions of people had watched his story, and the comments sections filled with reactions from viewers who saw something of themselves in his struggle. "I've walked to job interviews because I couldn't afford bus fare," wrote one commenter. "This is what justice with humanity looks like," wrote another. But perhaps the most telling response came from Frank Caprio himself, the man whose donation had made Judge Caprio's gesture possible. In a follow-up letter to the judge, he wrote, "When I see stories like Daniel's, I remember why I send these small donations. It's not about the money. It's about showing people that their community sees them and values them." Daniel Murray had inadvertently become a symbol of perseverance in the face of economic hardship, and Judge Caprio had become a reminder that authority figures can choose compassion without abandoning justice. Daniel's story resonated so powerfully because it reflects struggles that millions of Americans face every day. The gap between income and expenses, the impossible choice between competing necessities, the way financial stress can make simple tasks feel overwhelming. In a society where transportation is often taken for granted, Daniel's 5-mile walk highlighted how quickly someone can become isolated when they can't afford a car, can't afford repairs, can't afford bus fare. His story wasn't unique in its hardship. It was unique in its resolution. Most people facing similar circumstances don't get to appear before Judge Caprio. Most don't receive donations from generous strangers. Most simply struggle in silence, hoping their integrity will somehow be enough to carry them through. Daniel's moment of recognition became a reminder that there are countless other people walking their own 5-mile journeys, metaphorically, if not literally, and that as a society, we get to choose whether we see them or ignore them. 3 months after his court appearance, Daniel found steady work at a local logistics company. The job didn't pay much, but it was enough to cover his rent and groceries, with a little left over to slowly rebuild his emergency fund. He bought a used bicycle, not quite a car, but a significant upgrade from walking everywhere. And he kept Judge Caprio's $25 in his wallet, not as money to spend, but as a reminder of what had happened that day in court. It wasn't really about the fine being dismissed, Daniel reflected later. It was about feeling seen. Feeling like my efforts to do the right thing mattered to someone besides me. He began volunteering at a local food bank, helping other people who found themselves in temporary difficult circumstances. It was his way of paying forward the kindness he'd received. In interviews following the viral video, Judge Caprio was asked why he chose to dismiss Daniel's fines and give him money for transportation. When someone walks 5 miles to honor their responsibility to the court with 92 cents in their pocket, they're not really asking for a handout, he explained. They're demonstrating character. They're showing respect for the law and for the process, even when they have no financial means to satisfy the requirements. Justice, Judge Caprio continued, isn't just about applying penalties uniformly. It's about considering the whole person, the whole situation, and asking, what serves the greater good here? Does punishing someone for being poor make our community safer or stronger? Or does recognizing their integrity and giving them a chance to rebuild serve everyone better? This philosophy had guided Judge Caprio throughout his career, earning him recognition not just as a judge, but as a symbol of compassionate authority. The reaction to Daniel's story extended far beyond social media likes and shares. Frank Caprio, the man whose donation had funded Judge Caprio's gesture, received dozens of letters from people wanting to contribute to similar acts of kindness. A local church started a fund specifically to help people with transportation costs for court appearances. Several businesses in Providence began offering part-time work, specifically for people trying to get back on their feet financially. Perhaps most significantly, Daniel's story prompted conversations about systemic issues. The challenge of urban transportation for low-income residents, the way that financial penalties can trap people in cycles of debt, and the importance of maintaining human dignity within bureaucratic systems. One person's courage to do the right thing, as one local editorial put it, revealed both a problem and a possibility. The problem of how we sometimes punish poverty. The possibility of how we might choose to respond with wisdom instead. What makes Daniel Murray's story so compelling isn't its uniqueness, but its universality. Almost everyone has faced a moment when doing the right thing was also the difficult thing, when integrity required sacrifice, when maintaining dignity meant accepting hardship. The 5-mile walk becomes a metaphor for all the invisible efforts. People make every day to honor their responsibilities, despite challenging circumstances. The single parent working multiple jobs, the student balancing education with employment, the elderly person managing fixed income challenges, the recent immigrant navigating new systems and expectations. Daniel's story reminds us that behind every parking ticket, every court appearance, every bureaucratic interaction, there's a human being with a story worth understanding. And Judge Caprio's response reminds us that those in positions of authority have choices about how to exercise that authority. Choices that can either add to someone's burden or help lighten their load. $25. In the grand scheme of economic hardship, it's not a life-changing amount of money. But the impact of Judge Caprio's gesture extended far beyond its monetary value. For Daniel, it was validation that his efforts mattered. For the courtroom observers, it was proof that the justice system could operate with both firmness and compassion. For the millions who watched the video online, it was a reminder that small acts of kindness can have profound effects. The letter from Frank Damasio that made the gesture possible represents another kind of quiet heroism. The decision to contribute anonymously to help strangers in need. Mr. Damasio's donations to Judge Caprio's court fund had helped dozens of people over the years, most of whom never became viral video subjects. This network of quiet generosity, Judge Caprio's willingness to use donated funds thoughtfully, Mr. Damasio's decision to give without recognition, Daniel's determination to honor his obligations despite hardship, created a moment of grace that touched people around the world. Perhaps the most powerful aspect of Daniel's story is how it illustrates the relationship between dignity and adversity. Daniel could have felt ashamed of his financial situation, embarrassed about having to walk to court, defensive about his inability to pay the fines. Instead, he chose to approach his circumstances with honesty and integrity. He didn't make excuses or blame others. He simply acknowledged his situation and asked if there was a way to fulfill his obligations despite his limitations. This approach, owning his challenges without being defined by them, allowed Judge Caprio to see past the surface details to the character underneath. Dignity, as one observer noted, isn't about never facing hardship. It's about how you carry yourself when hardship comes. Daniel Murray walked 5 miles with his head held high, and that made all the difference. The story serves as a reminder that economic circumstances don't determine human worth, and that maintaining personal integrity during difficult times can sometimes open doors that money cannot. Judge Frank Caprio's handling of Daniel's case exemplifies the judicial philosophy that has made him beloved by viewers of Caught in Providence and respected by colleagues throughout the legal system. Rather than viewing his role simply as applying predetermined penalties, Judge Caprio sees himself as an agent of both justice and mercy. He understands that true justice considers not just the violation, but the violator. Not just what happened, but why it happened, and what response will best serve both the individual and the community. This approach requires wisdom, discretion, and the ability to see patterns and possibilities that rigid rule following might miss. It also requires the courage to sometimes choose the unexpected response, knowing that mercy can be more powerful than punishment in creating positive change. Judge Caprio's career has been filled with such moments, cases where he chose understanding over condemnation, second chances over harsh penalties, human connection over bureaucratic distance. Daniel's case simply happened to be captured on video and shared with the world. The widespread positive reaction to Daniel's story suggests a hunger for examples of institutional compassion and individual integrity. In an era when news often focuses on conflict and failure, his 5-mile walk and Judge Caprio's response offered something different: hope. The story also highlighted important questions about how society should respond to economic inequality. Should financial penalties be adjusted based on ability to pay? How can courts balance the need for consequences with recognition of individual circumstances? What role should community support play in helping people through temporary hardships? These aren't simple questions with easy answers, but Daniel's story provided a concrete example of what thoughtful, individualized justice might look like. It showed how a system can maintain its integrity while acknowledging the humanity of the people it serves. The viral nature of the video also demonstrated the power of positive stories to inspire broader conversations about fairness, compassion, and community responsibility. For Daniel Murray, the experience of walking to court and receiving Judge Caprio's unexpected mercy became a turning point, not just financially. The dismissed fines and transportation money were helpful but temporary, but psychologically and emotionally. I learned that doing the right thing, even when it's hard, even when you don't think anyone will notice or care, still matters, Daniel reflected months later. Sometimes it matters in ways you never expected. The experience gave him confidence to keep pushing forward despite setbacks. It reinforced his belief that integrity was worth maintaining, even when it seemed to offer no immediate rewards. And it connected him to a broader community of people who valued character over convenience. Daniel's story became part of his identity, but not in a way that trapped him in victimhood or made him dependent on others' charity. Instead, it became proof that he could handle difficult circumstances with grace, and that the community would sometimes offer support when he needed it most. The impact of that October morning in Providence Municipal Court continues to spread in ways both visible and invisible. The video has been viewed millions of times, translated into multiple languages, and shared across every social media platform. But beyond the digital metrics, the story has influenced real-world actions and attitudes. Judges in other jurisdictions have cited it when discussing approaches to low-level offenses. Social service organizations have used it to illustrate the complex relationship between poverty and law enforcement. And individuals facing their own hardships have found inspiration in Daniel's example. Perhaps most importantly, it has contributed to ongoing conversations about how institutions can maintain their authority and effectiveness while operating with greater humanity and wisdom. The $25. Judge Caprio gave Daniel has been paid forward countless times through Daniel's volunteer work, through increased donations to similar funds, and through the kindness that viewers have shown to others in their own communities. In the end, Daniel Murray's 5-mile walk to court represents something both simple and profound: the power of showing up. Showing up even when it's difficult, showing up even when you have nothing material to offer. Showing up because you believe in doing the right thing, regardless of whether anyone notices or rewards that choice. Judge Frank Caprio's response represents the equal power of seeing clearly, looking past surface circumstances to recognize character, choosing mercy without abandoning justice, and understanding that sometimes the most important gift you can give someone is acknowledgement of their efforts. Together, their interaction created a moment of grace that reminded millions of viewers that fairness, compassion, and integrity still matter in our world. That institutions can be both strong and kind. That individual actions, however small, can make a difference. Daniel Murray walked 5 miles with 92 cents in his pocket, expecting nothing more than the chance to explain his situation and ask for a payment plan. He left with his fines dismissed, money for transportation, and proof that his integrity had been seen and valued. But perhaps most importantly, he left having reminded everyone who heard his story that dignity, determination, and doing the right thing are currencies that never lose their value, no matter how little money you have in your wallet. The next time you face a difficult choice between what's easy and what's right, remember Daniel Murray's 5-mile walk. The next time you have the opportunity to show mercy to someone who's struggling, remember Judge Caprio's wisdom. And the next time you wonder whether your efforts to maintain your integrity during hard times really matter, remember that sometimes the most important journeys are the ones that nobody else sees, until suddenly the whole world is watching and cheering you on. What would you have done in Daniel's situation? What would you have done in Judge Caprio's position? Let us know in the comments below. And if this story moved you, share it with someone who might need to be reminded that integrity is always worth the walk. Because in a world that often seems to reward shortcuts over character, stories like Daniel's prove that doing the right thing, even when it requires walking 5 miles with less than $1 in your pocket, still matters, still has power, and still can change everything.